For 3 years, I worked silently under a woman who believed my existence was temporary. But when I placed my resignation letter on the desk while the CEO was absent, she laughed like she'd already won. She didn't know I was the only reason their largest sponsor hadn't pulled out, and she was about to blow it all up with her own hands. My name is Jessica Monroe, and at 34, I'd built my career on being invisible, not the kind of invisible that meant incompetent or forgettable, but the kind that meant indispensable without fanfare. For 3 years, I'd served as the Sponsorship Coordination Director at the Halcyon Foundation, one of Chicago's largest nonprofit organizations dedicated to urban education reform. When I first walked through Halcyon's glass doors 3 years ago, the organization was hemorrhaging money and credibility. Their relationship with Prescott Ventures, a powerhouse investment firm that provided nearly 70% of our operating budget through a massive $760 million endowment, was hanging by a thread. The previous director had bungled negotiations so badly that Victor Maddox, Prescott's notoriously unforgiving CEO, was days away from pulling the plug entirely. They hired me out of desperation. I wasn't their first choice, or even their fifth. I was simply the only candidate willing to take on what everyone considered a suicide mission. The board gave me 6 months to salvage the relationship. I did it in 3. The key to keeping Prescott happy wasn't rocket science, but it required something most people in nonprofit leadership lack the ability to speak their language. I didn't waste Victor's time with emotional appeals or glossy brochures filled with smiling children. I gave him data, metrics, and ROI projections. I showed him exactly how his money was being used, down to the last penny. More importantly, I delivered results he could brag about at country club dinners. For 2 blissful years, I operated with near-complete autonomy. The board trusted me, the staff respected me, and Prescott's quarterly reviews were glowing. I'd even developed a solid working relationship with Laura Benning, Prescott's CFO, who appreciated my no-nonsense approach to financial reporting. Then Vivian Maddox entered the picture. Victor's wife was everything I wasn't: loud, flashy, and utterly convinced that her marriage to wealth qualified her for any position she desired. When she expressed interest in giving back to the community, Victor strong-armed Halcyon's board into appointing her to an executive advisory role. It was supposed to be ceremonial, a vanity title that would look good on her social media profiles. But Vivian had other plans. From day one, she treated me like her personal assistant. Despite my director title and the critical nature of my work, she'd interrupt strategy meetings to ask me to fetch her oat milk lattes or adjust the conference room temperature. She'd roll her eyes when I presented quarterly reports, checking her phone and sighing dramatically as if my careful maintenance of our largest funding source was beneath her attention. "Jessica handles the boring money stuff," she'd say with a dismissive wave whenever board members asked about Prescott. "I'm here to bring some vision to this place." Her vision consisted mainly of pet projects designed to generate Instagram content rather than actual impact. She pushed for lavish fundraising galas that cost more than they raised, insisted on hiring her friends as consultants for vague roles, and redirected program funds toward flashy initiatives that photographed well but delivered nothing substantial. I watched our carefully cultivated relationship with Prescott start to fray. Victor's emails grew shorter, Laura's responses more delayed. The trust I'd built was eroding under the weight of Vivian's interference, but every time I tried to address it, she'd remind me of my place. "Your support staff, Jessica," she said during one particularly humiliating board meeting where she'd credited my latest Prescott negotiation to her own relationship building. Try to remember that. I did remember. I remembered every slight, every dismissed concern, every time she undermined 3 years of delicate relationship management. But most of all, I remembered that she had no idea how much of Halcyon's survival rested on the foundation I'd built with Prescott, a foundation that existed entirely in my head, my contacts, and my personal relationship with their leadership team. She was about to learn exactly how much that invisible work was worth. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in late March. I'd spent the entire weekend preparing for Prescott's annual review, scheduled for the following week. This wasn't just any review, it was the meeting that would determine whether they'd renew their commitment for another 5 years. Every chart, every metric, every success story had been meticulously documented and cross-referenced. I arrived at 7:30 a.m. to find Vivian sitting at my desk, scrolling through my computer screen with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never worked for anything in her life. "Oh, good. You're here," she said without looking up. "I've decided to handle the Prescott presentation myself. After all, Victor and I have a personal relationship that transcends mere numbers." My stomach dropped. "The presentation is next week. I've been preparing for months." "And I'm sure you've done adequate prep work," she interrupted, finally gracing me with her attention. Her smile was all teeth and no warmth. "But let's be honest. Jessica, do you really think Victor wants to hear from someone at your level? I'll be bringing in Cheryl, you know, my friend from the country club, to help me add some sophistication to your little PowerPoint." I stood there, feeling the weight of 3 years of work slipping through my fingers. "Cheryl doesn't know anything about our programs or our relationship with Prescott." Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. "She doesn't need to. She knows how to talk to people like Victor, people of a certain caliber." She stood, smoothing her designer dress. "You can email me your files. I'll take it from here." That afternoon, I typed my resignation letter, 2 paragraphs, professionally worded, effective immediately. I'd been offered positions elsewhere before, but had turned them down out of loyalty to Halcyon's mission. That loyalty had officially expired. The next morning, I waited until I knew the CEO would be at his off-site meeting. I wanted to deliver my resignation directly to his desk, not have it filtered through Vivian's hands. I placed the envelope dead center on his leather desk pad and turned to leave. Vivian was standing in the doorway, her expression somewhere between amusement and triumph. "Quitting." She plucked the envelope from the desk before I could stop her, tearing it open with manicured nails. Her eyes scanned the letter, and her smile widened with each line. "Oh, this is precious. You really think you're irreplaceable, don't you?" I said nothing, which seemed to irritate her more than any response would have. "Let me explain something to you," she said, crumpling my letter into a ball. "They don't need you to keep Prescott. They never did. Victor funds this place because of his relationship with the board, because of the tax benefits, because it looks good, not because some nobody coordinator knows how to make spreadsheets." She tossed the crumpled letter into the wastebasket with theatrical flair. "I'll smooth things over with Richard when he gets back. Tell him you left for personal reasons. No need to make this dramatic." I remained silent, watching her savor what she thought was her victory. "Nothing to say?" "No impassioned defense of your contributions." She laughed. That same brittle sound from before. "That's what I thought. You can clean out your desk. I'll have security escort you out in an hour." I left a single manila folder on my desk, a basic transition document listing passwords and contact information. Nothing more. The real knowledge. The relationships I'd cultivated. The unwritten rules of managing Victor Maddox's expectations. The personal touches that kept Prescott engaged, all of that walked out with me. As security supervised my box packing an hour later, I heard Vivian on the phone in the next room, her voice bright with false confidence. "Cheryl, darling, we need to move up our timeline. The Prescott presentation is next week, and I want to absolutely dazzle them." I closed my desk drawer for the last time, thinking about all the things Vivian didn't know. She didn't know that Victor hated surprise changes to meeting agendas. She didn't know that Laura Benning required financial reports in a specific format that had taken me 6 months to perfect. She didn't know about the monthly off-the-record coffee meetings where I addressed Prescott's concerns before they became deal-breakers. Most importantly, she didn't know that 3 days ago. Laura had texted me privately about some concerns regarding Halcyon's recent spending patterns, concerns I'd been planning to address in next week's presentation. As the security guard walked me to the elevator, I pulled out my personal phone and scrolled to Laura's message. I didn't reply. Not yet. But I didn't delete it either. Vivian thought she'd won. In reality, she'd just lit a very expensive fuse. 3 days after my unceremonious exit, I sat in my home office, staring at Laura Benning's unanswered text. The smart thing would have been to let it go, to move on with my life, and let Vivian deal with the consequences of her arrogance. But 3 years of dedication doesn't evaporate overnight, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't want to watch her fail. I crafted my response carefully, professional, concerned, but not vindictive. "Hi, Laura. I apologize for the delayed response. I'm no longer with Halcyon as of this week. I'm not sure who will be handling the Prescott relationship going forward, but I wanted to make sure your concerns were addressed. Best regards, Jessica. Her reply came within minutes. No longer with Halcyon, call me, now. The conversation that followed was illuminating. Laura was more than concerned, she was furious. Apparently, Vivian had already reached out to introduce herself as the new point of contact and had made several tone-deaf suggestions about modernizing their partnership with social media campaigns and influencer involvement. Victor nearly had a stroke, Laura said. You know how he feels about that kind of thing. What the hell is happening over there? I chose my words carefully. I can't speak to Halcyon's internal decisions. I can only say that I've documented all processes and historical context in my transition materials. Jessica, cut the diplomatic bullshit. Should we be concerned about our investment? This was the moment. I could have reassured her, could have protected Halcyon despite everything. Instead, I said, as an independent sponsorship consultant, I'd recommend any major donor conduct a thorough review when there's significant leadership transition. The pause on her end was heavy with implication. Are you available for consulting work? I am. I'll send you a contract. We need an independent audit of Halcyon's sponsorship management practices. Fair market rate. Can you start immediately? And just like that, I was back in the game, but this time, playing for the other team. Over the next 2 days, I worked from my home office, compiling a comprehensive report. Everything I included was factual, based on publicly available information and my own personal records that I'd kept on my personal devices. I analyzed Halcyon's recent spending patterns, highlighted the deviation from established protocols, and provided a risk assessment for Prescott's continued investment. I was particularly careful to note the sudden influx of consultant fees paid to individuals with no clear deliverables, the redirect of funds from proven programs to untested initiatives, and the replacement of data-driven decisions with what could generously be called intuition-based strategies. The report was damning not because I made it so, but because the facts spoke for themselves. Meanwhile, Vivian was busy preparing for her big presentation. Through LinkedIn, I could see she'd been posting constantly about revolutionary changes coming to Halcyon and how she was elevating the organization to new heights. She'd even hired a professional photographer to capture her at work, seated at what used to be my desk. Dr. Louise Carter reached out to me privately on day 4. As one of Halcyon's longest-serving board members, she'd always been skeptical of Vivian's appointment, but had been outvoted by those eager to please Victor Maddox. Jessica, I've been trying to reach you. We've heard you've left, but no one will give me a straight answer about why. I kept my response neutral. I felt it was time for new challenges. Bullshit. I've seen the presentation Vivian's planning for Prescott. It's a disaster waiting to happen. Would you consider coming back? I don't think that's possible, Dr. Carter. However, I am available for independent consulting if the board needs an objective assessment of the situation. She hired me that afternoon. Another contract. Another opportunity to document what 3 years of relationship building looked like when it was systematically dismantled. The Prescott review was now 3 days away. Vivian had locked herself in the conference room with Cheryl and 2 other friends she'd brought on as consultants, frantically trying to understand my transition notes. She'd sent several emails to my old work address, demanding more detailed information. They bounced back. Of course, I was no longer an employee. Laura called me the evening before the presentation. Jessica, I've reviewed your audit. It's concerning. Victor's read it too. I simply documented the facts, Laura. I know, that's what makes it so damning. We've decided to add some elements to tomorrow's review. Victor wants to see not just the presentation, but also understand who's actually been managing this relationship. He has questions that I don't think Ms. Maddox will be able to answer. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the city lights through my apartment window. I'm sure she'll do her best. Her best isn't what we're paying for, Laura said quietly. We're paying for expertise, the kind that doesn't announce itself on Instagram. As I hung up, I thought about Vivian, probably still in that conference room, surrounded by her equally clueless friends, trying to cobble together 3 years of relationship management from a few passwords and contact lists. She thought she'd won when she crumpled up my resignation letter and laughed at my departure. Tomorrow, she'd learn that some bridges can't be rebuilt once you've watched them burn. The morning of the Prescott review. My phone buzzed at 6:45 a.m. Doctor, Carter's name flashed on the screen. Jessica, I need you to know what's happening. The board held an emergency session last night. The preliminary reports from you and several concerned donors have us in full crisis mode. I poured my coffee, keeping my voice neutral. I'm sorry to hear that. Don't be coy. You know exactly what's happening. Vivian's presentation is a disaster. We've seen the draft, it's all flash and no substance. She's proposing to rebrand our entire mission around social influence and viral impact. Victor Maddox is going to eviscerate us. What does the board plan to do? That's why I'm calling. We need you at that meeting. Not as an employee, but as our emergency consultant. Vivian doesn't know yet. Can you be at the Prescott offices at 2 p.m.? I agreed, already knowing how this would play out. Vivian had spent a week preparing the wrong presentation for the wrong audience, guided by people who understood nothing about what Prescott actually valued. By noon, the situation at Halcyon had deteriorated further. According to my former colleague who texted me, Vivian had arrived at the office in full panic mode. She'd somehow only just discovered that Prescott expected detailed financial projections, impact assessments, and accountability measures, not the mood boards and influence strategies she'd prepared. She's screaming at everyone, my colleague wrote, demanding to know why no one told her what Prescott wanted to see. It says she's been trying to access your old files, but everything was on your personal cloud. At 1:30 p.m., I arrived at Prescott's offices, dressed in my sharpest suit. Laura met me in the lobby, her expression grim but satisfied. Victor's already in a mood, she warned. He found out about the consultant fees Vivian's been approving. Did you know she paid someone $20,000 to design a new logo that looks exactly like the old one, but in millennial pink? I hadn't known that specific detail, but it didn't surprise me. We rode the elevator in silence to the 20th floor, where Prescott's boardroom commanded a stunning view of the Chicago skyline. The Halcyon team was already there. Vivian stood at the front, her usual confidence visibly shaken. She was surrounded by her consultants, including Cheryl, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Several board members, including Dr. Carter, sat along one side of the table. Vivian's face went white when she saw me enter with Laura. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, her voice pitched too high. "She doesn't work for Halcyon anymore." Dr. Carter stood. "Ms. Monroe is here as an independent consultant to the board. Given the significant changes in sponsorship management, we felt it prudent to have expertise present." Victor Maddox entered before Vivian could respond. At 62, he had the presence of someone who'd never had to raise his voice to command a room. His eyes swept the table, paused on me with a slight nod, then fixed on Vivian. "Let's begin," he said simply. What followed was one of the most painful presentations I'd ever witnessed. Vivian stumbled through slides filled with buzzwords and stock photos, clearly created by someone who'd Googled nonprofit presentation template at 2 a.m. She talked about synergistic partnerships and leveraging social capital, while Victor's expression grew increasingly stony. When she proposed replacing Halcyon's data tracking systems with narrative impact stories shared on TikTok, I saw Laura physically wince. "Stop," Victor said quietly, and Vivian's words died mid-sentence. "Where are the financial projections?" We're focusing on impact beyond numbers. We're a venture capital firm. We focus on numbers." He turned to Dr. Carter. "Is this what Halcyon is becoming?" Dr. Carter looked at me, and I knew my moment had come. "Mr. Maddox, if I may, the board has asked me to provide context for the recent changes." Vivian tried to interrupt. "You can't let her speak. She's bitter about being replaced." "Replaced?" Victor's eyebrows rose. "My understanding was that Ms. Monroe resigned. Was she terminated?" The silence was deafening. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I pulled out my tablet, connecting it to the presentation system with practiced ease. "Mr. Maddox, I've prepared a comparative analysis of Halcyon's sponsorship management practices over the past 3 years versus the last 2 weeks. What I showed them was simple: 3 years of steady growth, consistent communication, and measurable impact, followed by 2 weeks of chaos, unexplained expenses, and abandoned protocols. I didn't editorialize, I simply presented facts. This is sabotage, Vivian shrieked. She's trying to destroy us because I wouldn't let her keep her little fiefdom. Victor looked at her with something between pity and disgust. Mrs. Maddox, was Ms. Monroe terminated, or did she resign? Vivian's consultants were slowly edging toward the door. Cheryl had already gathered her things. She resigned, Vivian admitted sullenly. And yet you told my staff she was let go for poor performance. Interesting, Victor stood. I've seen enough. Prescott Ventures will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Halcyon. Effective immediately. All funds are frozen pending this review. The room erupted, board members demanding answers. Vivian trying to blame everyone but herself. Dr. Carter calling for order. Through it all, I remained seated, quietly packing up my tablet. As I stood to leave, Victor approached me. Ms. Monroe, do you have a few minutes for a private discussion? Behind us, Vivian was watching her carefully constructed world collapse, one donor at a time. Victor's private office was exactly what you'd expect from a man who built a billion-dollar investment firm understated, elegant, and designed to intimidate. He gestured to a leather chair across from his desk while he poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal decanter. 3 years, he said, settling into his chair. 3 years you managed our relationship with Halcyon, and this is the first time we've actually spoken one-on-one. You preferred it that way, I replied. You once told Richard that you didn't have time for middlemen who needed their hands held. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. You were listening during that conference call. I was taking notes. You said you valued efficiency, transparency, and results. So that's what I delivered. He leaned back, studying me. Laura tells me you've been doing consulting work since your departure, for us and for Halcyon's board. Independent analysis, nothing that violates any confidentiality agreements. Of course not. You're too smart for that. He pulled up something on his tablet.